Hi, can you guys hear me?
Okay, so now we're live.
Okay, now we started.
Okay, great. Okay, welcome everyone, and to today's session, Sentiment Analysis and Storytelling. My name is Jeff Toffley, Clarify's Senior Technical Writer, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping mentions. All attendees will be muted, but we encourage you to ask questions, which you can do by typing into the Q&A widget in the top right corner. We will answer all your questions after the session, which will be about 30 minutes. Today's session will be recorded and available after the event. And I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Jenny is a senior executive with over 15 years of experience working in technology high-growth consumer startups. She's the general manager at Wattpad, a global multi-platform entertainment company, and the world's leading social storytelling platform with a community of more than 80 million people. Prior to Wattpad, Jenny led growth and user acquisition at Shapeways, the world's largest 3D printing service, and has also worked at Yahoo as director of platform strategy, mobile payment company GoPago, and as head of marketing and business intelligence. And Jenny holds an MBA from the Harvard Business School and a BS in economics from Cornell University. She's a board member for Women of Color, the president of the board of Cornell Club of Toronto, and a member of the board of HBS Club of Toronto. And just a little bit of background about Clarify before we get started. Clarify is the leading independent provider of AI for unstructured image and video data. It's an end-to-end computer vision and NLP platform that covers the entire AI lifecycle. Clarify has won numerous awards and is recognized by Forrester as a leader in computer vision platforms, in line with companies like Google and Microsoft. The company was founded in 2013 by our CEO, Matt Seeler, PhD, after winning the top 5 places at ImageNet. And Clarify continues to grow with over 80 employees at our headquarters in New York City and our offices in San Francisco, DC, and Tallinn, Estonia. Wattpad is a global entertainment company and the world's leading social storytelling platform. The company's flagship app is home to a community of more than 90 million people who spend over 23 billion minutes a month engaged in original stories. Millions of people around the world have written nearly 1 billion uploads on the platform, and Wattpad's created a new era of storytelling, empowering diverse voices all over the world to share their stories, build an audience, and make money. With nearly 1 billion uploads, technology like Wattpad's StoryDNA machine learning technology is key to everything the company does. Jeanne Lam, general manager at Wattpad, will discuss how Wattpad is transforming storytelling and entertainment with data, ushering it in a new age of opportunity for writers everywhere.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Jeff. It's so nice to meet everyone. I did put in the chat a quick question, if you can respond, yes or no, if you've heard of Wattpad before. My guess is many of you have, but many of you have not, because Wattpad is used by a lot of Gen Zers, and I think there's probably less of them in this conference. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Wattpad. Jeff did such a great job sharing some of the stats, but it's helpful to understand the context. And so Wattpad is the leading social storytelling platform. A lot of people read a lot of stories on Wattpad on a monthly basis, on a daily basis. And what's unique about Wattpad is that we're a truly global company. And so read by millions of people all around the world. And I believe I pulled the numbers once where we are in every single country around the world except for 3, North Korea, Iran, and China. And so we have stories in over 50 languages, and anyone can write a story anytime. They post a story and they can find an audience on Wattpad. And that's really the genesis of what the platform does. And you can find stories that are, Afro-Caribbean romance to deep space sci-fi to young adult mystery to so almost literally any genre you can imagine. And it started in 2006 with this flip phone. Call Me Ishmael were the first 3 words that were read on the Wattpad app at the time. And it's because we started by feeding public domain stories into Wattpad in order to see the foundation of this platform. And the reason that I'm here to connect with you all today on machine learning and the application of it is when you have over almost 1 billion uploads now, the question of how do we understand all of that content and what do we do with it becomes a very big one that I think in 2006 we couldn't have foresaw as one of the biggest challenges that we would have. And so if that was the start of where we were, I thought it'd be helpful to share a little bit of history on where we are now and where we're going. And it starts with the vision, which is to entertain and connect the world through stories. So we're literally enabling writers and readers all over the world to write. But the thing that doesn't show up when we talk about it in this way is the connection that people form with each other when they're writing. Writing is a very lonely process. You are writing manuscripts, putting it in your drawer, taking it out again, and you're putting yourself on paper in a very creative and raw way. And when writers are able to find each other and talk about the writing process, and whenever they're able to find people who comment on their story for that very first time, it's actually a very, very meaningful experience for a writer. And that's what makes this part about connection and a critical part of our vision and where we're trying to go. And so there's a question of like, well, how have we done so far? We started as this writing app in 2006. Wattpad has, through the past 14 years, gone from a writing app to a global media entertainment company. And that's how we describe ourselves now. And technology has been a real important foundation for that. So if you've never used the Wattpad app, I would ask all of you to go download it. And so I can acquire those signups one by one. But you might have heard of Wattpad stories through a whole bunch of different channels. The Kissing Booth is one of Netflix's most watched movies ever. It was #1 in 50 countries around the world, as said by Netflix publicly. The After franchise, which is currently has been released a couple of years ago and now is on, filming the next in the series, is a New York Times bestseller, which has sold millions of copies. Started as Anna Todd writing on her iOS device, literally one chapter at a time, and now has become this global phenomenon. Even during this time, people have gone to the theaters to watch it. And so After We Collided is actually out in theaters now. And then Light as a Feather it has been nominated for 10 Emmy awards. And so there is a certain power of giving people voice that they would never really have before through any other platform, and being able to bring that to big screens and small screens and bookshelves all around the world. So there's a question: how do we consistently find hit after hit of new IP? And the answer is we do it by listening to our data and our global community of users. And so Wattpad really generates this constant stream of culture-defining IPs, and they're culture-defining because it's not really a bunch of screenwriters sitting in a room thinking about what's next. It's actually folks that just want to tell their stories based on what's happening in the world today. And so it's a constant stream of culture-defining IPs across a wide variety of genres that's truly global. And so with nearly 1 billion uploads, technology that I'll be talking about today, StoryDNA machine learning technology, is a really critical part of everything that we do. And that's what really makes Wattpad special, is that it's a combination of art and science that we use in order to bring storytelling and entertainment to bear and to market. And so these are some examples on the right-hand side of some of the stories that we are most recently involved with and bringing to market, working closely with the writers to do it. And so I thought it would be helpful to tell you a little bit about sort of some of the fundamental market opportunities in front of us that's led us down this path. And I think we would all agree in almost every sense, entertainment is going through a period of disruption. How people create, how people discover, what kind of content they want, how they consume content is rapidly changing. And I think we've really seen the acceleration of that in the past 6 months because of where we are in the quarantine state today. And then the second is like this demand for original content IP is higher than ever. And we've seen a lot of that more recently through all of the young adult hits that have come to market that we all love. Hunger Games, Harry Potter, all of that is different and original content. And it's because the creative process for entertainment is still largely unchanged. It's heavily based on entertainment, on intuition and traditional gatekeepers, that we see there's a really good opportunity for disruption by bringing original content backed by data to market. And then the last is, as entertainment services go global, creating culture-defining hits with broad appeal and local relevance from diverse voices literally becomes table stakes. And we've seen the acceleration of this year as well. And so Wattpad feels extremely well positioned to take advantage of the market disruption that's happening. And we're driving a lot of that change. So the question is, like, how are we doing it? It starts from the beginning, from how the company works, which is something that I'll refer to as the Wattpad Flywheel. This is a key part of understanding how everything else ties together. And so I won't dig too much into it, but I want to take you through the whole thing. At Wattpad, we all start with creating stories. The story is the fundamental economic unit of everything we do. The more stories you create, the more readers that you are able to attract. And if you do a good job of matching the readers and the writers and the stories, consuming these relevant content, you have a pretty good media marketplace. We could be a good bookseller. We could be a good streaming service. These are all folks that are really good at this part of the flywheel. But that's not all we do. I alluded earlier to connection. Connection with the community is a fundamental part of what makes Wattpad unique, different, and poised to ride this wave in a way that nobody else is. People feel connected when they're reading a story that they can't find anywhere else, that nobody else they know really has that level of interest in, but they can find it on Wattpad and they can connect with each other on it. And a writer can connect with another writer and share plot points. And readers can say things like, I've never seen a protagonist who has the same mental disability that I do. And it's amazing to see that. And that connection keeps people not only engaged, but one of the most engaged audiences across any social platform. People spend 37 minutes in every average session on Wattpad. And what does that connection do? It creates this incredibly rewarding experience for writers, so that every vote, every comment that you get on Wattpad makes you want to write more. In a world in which it used to be a very solitary experience, suddenly you're craving putting your pen to paper or like hands on keyboard. And that then gets you to write more stories. And then we are able to attract more readers. And so we have this very positive network effect that makes this flywheel spin. And that's a simple articulation of how Wattpad works. And it's really important because the story is at the center of everything we do. It's the start of our flywheel. And there are many elements to what makes up a story. Elemental features like genre, grammar, tone, sentence structure, how you combine the words. All of these are really the fundamental building blocks of a story, which is what readers want to read. But when you have millions and millions of stories, when you have 1 billion uploads and 5 million people every month writing, you can kind of guess why Clarify asked me to come speak on the application of machine learning in our business. And so with all of that context, I thought it would be helpful to insert a stock photo of a high-tech gadgetry here. With all that context, that's where we really rely on StoryDNA, which is something that was we started over 3 years ago in our investment in StoryDNA, which is basically using machine learning, deep learning, recurrent neural networks in order to better understand and discover stories amongst the 1 billion uploads that we have. And there's a little known fact at the company that StoryDNA's terminology is actually inspired by Pandora's Music Genome Project, where Pandora, many years ago, literally had humans sitting in a room coding across, I think, hundreds of variables, every single song according to those variables. And so that was a clear indication of how you can find music in a way that you could never find before. And in our instance, really be able to understand the content of a story at a much deeper level. And so StoryDNA deconstructs stories into all of their elemental features, sentence structure, word use, grammar, etc., that we deploy to find the next bestseller. And before StoryDNA, before we made this investment, how did we find content? How do we serve our users in terms of recommendation engines? How did we know what to bring to publishing houses? We mostly found it through trend data and a lot of like just humans who really understood and knew a lot of our stories and spent a lot of time reading. And so we use machine learning to understand content. And separately from that, I think it's often helpful to distinguish the difference in how we use these different technologies. We use big data analytics to understand the behaviors, funnels, recommendations, engine, things like that, of user data. And it is in the combination of the two that we have a very unique perspective on stories and on content. But that is how I would think about the difference here. So before we could really deeply understand the content through machine learning, we had to use trend data. We had to use our an understanding of if a user really likes to read this story and they also like to read this story, perhaps we should recommend story B, even though we actually had very little understanding of what story B was about. And so I would think of that as like working around the content when we couldn't possibly understand what was actually contained within each story unit. And so with the investment in StoryDNA, it really came out of this deep belief that understanding the content itself was critical path to our ability to really break through. And the only way we could ever understand that much content at scale is through machine learning. So in 2017, and I feel like it's important to share some of the how we got here, because there are folks on this call who might be thinking about this kind of investment. It was in 2017 that we really started with some effort around pipeline infrastructure and human data labeling for some content. And we kind of stopped and go on it and made stop and go progress for some time until we really invested proper product and engineering support to truly go forth with the effort. So that by 2018, we tested and failed a whole bunch of models, but we found a few that we started applying in the business. And in 2019, we really productized it so that folks throughout the business would be able to lean in and pull from the output. And then in 2020 is really expanding our focus to many more aspects of the sort of grammatical structure and elements of a story that we talked about. And so it's really allowed us to have these exciting new layers of understanding of our own business. So here are some examples of the models that have come out of our machine learning investments, of our StoryDNA investments. I will go through one as an example because I think it's helpful to pull in through the thread of how it's been applied. But we've gone literally across the board in terms of understanding everything from trying to understand the quality of a story, which is subjective, but how can we make that a little bit more objective? And we apply classical machine learning to it. We have so many stories. How do we find more stories that are similar to the ones that we think are going to be big blockbuster successes? That's a comparable finder, but it's a black box for us because we're applying deep learning for it. We have topic modeling, which really helps us understand the themes that exist in stories. And then the last is even understanding the emotions of specific parts of a story. You can imagine if there's a cliffhanger at a certain part, maybe that's where a writer should really leave it so that they keep their readers coming back for the next part of it. And maybe there's a way that we can help inform how writers think about it even. And so these are all in different states of use and production. And these are and we've had I could probably do 2 more slides of failed experiments on machine learning, but these are the ones that still persist that we use more regularly. And I'm going to take you through Quality Indexer because I get to talk about the Watties as how it relates. So Watties is an award that is an annual award. And it's an award that I believe is the biggest writing contest in the world that's done on an annual basis. I think we once looked into having Guinness Book of World Records certify that, and it was like way too in-depth of a process. And so I'm just gonna crown myself as being okay with believing it's the largest in the world. In 2019, it was the 10th year that we've run it. And it's the largest in the world because since 2009, we've had over 1 million entries to date. And out of it, we've produced some of the biggest hits that we've seen on Wattpad. You saw Kissing Booth earlier on one of my slides by Beth Riegels. And this is a story that won a Watties Award in 2011. And since then, she's had 2 of those stories been produced by Netflix. She's got writing deals from Penguin Random House, and it's become a true global success. And so how do you judge the world's largest writing contest? That's where Quality Indexer has really come into play. So the Quality Indexer basically finds patterns in the grammar and sentence structure of stories in the training data set and tells us if other stories have similar grammar and sentence structure. So we were able to train our model on about 20,000 public domain Gutenberg classics, which are free to access by the public, and 9 years worth of Wattys winners and handpicked Watty stories that we've identified as representing quality, good sentence structure, good grammar, easy to read as a result. And each word in a story is indexed by the type of word it is: noun, adverb, adjective, proverb, etc. And the machine learning model finds patterns in the grammar and structure, sentence structure, that stories in the training data showed, and compares that grammar and sentence structure to those patterns in any new content that we feed into it. And out of that spits an output score for each story that tells us on the quality index, where do you rank? And so it's a simplified way of explaining how Quality Indexer works. And the reason why it's important to use that is then we feed all of our Wattys submissions through Story Quality Indexer. And StoryDNA allows us to review these submissions at scale, because now it's helping us prioritize based on quality, basically the most promising stories amongst hundreds of thousands of entries. Last year, we had over 169,000 entries for Wattys. And so once we have this list, this is where art meets science. So from here, our human content experts take over. They take a much closer look at each story. We're still reading thousands and thousands and thousands of submissions, but we're reading them with this initial filter. And our community told us, after we started using StoryDNA, Quality Indexer, to evaluate stories, they actually found the contest to be more fair, because we weren't prioritizing based on popularity or quality or anything like that. We were trying to do it with the lens of sentence structure and grammar, which allowed us to find stories we would have never come across because they might not have been read by many people, but could have been incredibly well written. And so our community was telling us that this has made the competition more fair, where literally anyone can win this year. And that was like an incredible testament to the kind of investment we're making that was unexpected in terms of the result of this. And so Wattys is one of the biggest areas that we use our Quality Indexer, but our teams use it too. Our editorial team who work with writers use it as one of their inputs on how to guide their writer and the writing process. We help writers by providing them a writing score so they understand areas that they could be thinking about making improvements on. And it's important to remember that when we talk about art meets science, it's a human lens that's critical to really evaluate the content itself, but it also adds bias into the data, right? We use Gutenberg classics to train the data. We picked the winners from the past Wattys Awards and other stories within Wattpad to train it. So we already are introducing bias into the data in this way, and we have to understand the impact of that. One example is high fantasy stories almost always get a high Quality Indexer score. They're dense, they're very literary, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that story will perform better amongst our audience than any other story just because it's literary. In fact, this doesn't actually necessarily represent taste, because one of the best performing stories that people are willing to pay for as part of our paid stories program doesn't score particularly high on Quality Indexer. The story itself was captivating enough. And so the human and the science together are really make our ability to find the next big blockbusters an important combined approach. And it is more about just finding great stories. So we take our jobs very seriously when we think about our responsibility to elevating new voices from all over the world and changing lives. And so the Wattys Award winner not only gets a badge of honor, which is an incredible badge of honor, there's a sticker that you get to put on your book, but you get a book deal out of it. Historically Inaccurate won the Waddies Award in 2019 from a Mexican-American writer, Shea Bravo. It's on bookshelves now in bookstores. And it's a story following a young woman dealing with her mother who was deported. And it went from an idea to a Waddies submission to almost 410,000 reads on Wattpad, and now is an actual book on bookshelves. And so we're able to use machine learning technology to create a real physical presence for marginalized communities on bookshelves around the world. And so we take this responsibility very seriously in this responsibility to find great stories from diverse voices. And the reason why is because that representation matters. It's one of the things that Wattpad has been built on. It's a cornerstone of what we believe in providing a safe space for marginalized communities to share their stories. And we think that that's going to disrupt entertainment in the future. And so we can't really talk about machine learning without talking about this. This is an internal chart of our own breakdown of people of color at Wattpad between the leadership team and the company as a whole. And you can see that people of color represent almost half of people on the leadership team. The same makeup applies to women in technology at the company. And so Wattpad was built by 2 people of color in Toronto, one of the most diverse cities in the world. And we've been able to build a team that matches the diversity of our global community. And we can be more conscious about how we train our machines as a result. And it's an area that we actively invest in. I have a request literally right now on my desk to help fund more diversity and inclusion training for the company. And so it really starts with our people. And we all know that machine learning is only as good as the data set it starts with. And starting with one of the most diverse data sets in the world, with diverse voices behind those machines, is a really, really important part of how we think about growth. And one example of that, and then I think we're ready to wrap up and take some questions, is that a few years ago, we looked at the support for trans community and other marginalized gender identities on Wattpad. I mentioned that we really believe this is an important role that we play in the world. And we found that readers spent 13 million minutes each month reading stories that support more LGBTQ characters and representation. And we found that there was this growth of exciting new narratives dedicated towards people who identify as transgender, agender, gender fluid. And so it was an expansion of how people thought about representation in stories. But recently, this year, we've seen that there's been an increase from that time to now by about 18%. And we're at 32 million minutes per year read on stories tagged with gender and trans and all these other terms that I just mentioned. And so what does this mean for representation? Why is this important to recognize? And it's because I cannot think of another situation in which a trans character story featuring a trans character and magic and unicorns situated in Hindu mythology would have really ever found the light of day. And not only did it find the light of day at Wattpad, I'm a Gay Wizard, which is the name of the story, combined all the best things of LGBTQ on Wattpad, was a standout story that we all loved. And we loved it so much that we published it last year, and with a sequel that will hit the bookshelves in a week. And this is why using technology to find new voices in storytelling matters. This is why we make an investment in StoryDNA, so that we can surface content like I'm a Gay Wizard, like Historically Inaccurate, so that we can help our people do it, and that we are really helping authors assert their voices and stories in creating space for them in a world that they really wouldn't have had the chance to do otherwise. So I'm going to leave you with a few things, but I'm going to start with a question that I always get asked, which is, so when will machines write the next story for Wattpad? And the answer is, machines will not write the next story for Wattpad. We have 5 million people a month who are writing stories on Wattpad. We do not need machines to help us do that, but we certainly can use machines to help unlock the opportunities that exist. And so technology is a means, not the end. And I gave you a little bit of the history of how StoryDNA came about, because making progress on big ideas requires a lot of intention and an understanding of how it fuels everything else in your flywheel. And then the last is that we knew when we invested in StoryDNA that there were obvious use cases, and we knew that there were things that we wouldn't ever have expected. And that was part of the excitement and reason to invest. And so this investment can absolutely pay off in both expected and unexpected ways. So I hope that was a helpful overview of how we've applied machine learning at Wattpad. And I'd love to welcome any questions that you might have.
Thank you so very much, Jenny. That was fascinating, and Wattpad is doing such exciting work for the world and the world of writers. We did have some questions come in, and I'm going to kind of fire these off to you here. So
let's see if I can stop sharing my screen.
Okay. All right. So first up, this question asker here says, so in 2016, Wattpad published its master plan outlining what the company would focus on in the next decade. Investing in machine learning is specifically called out as an area of focus, and certainly I think you got into these things, but they're asking, how did you make that decision, and how has your success in machine learning been guided by that master plan?
Sure. I mean, Wattpad's vision for the company is to literally entertain and connect the world through stories. And if you think about what that means from an application basis, that means that it's not only on your phone that you're reading a written story, but that you're watching a Wattpad story on Netflix, that you're going to movie theater with it, that you're hearing it on your drive on your way to work. And we think about the opportunity, the market disruption that I talked about in that context, in that big of a scale. And so when we think about how that applies to machine learning and where we're trying to go with it, it is a very deep investment in that long-term vision, the ability to find those incredible stories that can be adapted, that can be franchisable, that people create fandoms over. It is a big part of how we find those stories and how we really bring those stories to market is the reliance on machine learning. And that's why we made that investment. I think if we thought small, if we thought, we want to continue and only be a global app, we want to just make money or whatever those things are that are very kind of focused on just the current version of what Wattpad is, or really the past version of Wattpad is, we wouldn't have necessarily seen that as a necessary investment. We could have just relied on the trend data that we had to inform what stories to be found. We could have hired a bunch of people to go and find stories and read them, and that would have been sufficient. But because the dream is so big and the vision is so big and the opportunity is right in front of us, we needed to really go and understand and own the understanding of stories at a content level. And the only way we could do that was through machine learning. And that's why we made that investment.
Cool. Here's another question for you. So they're asking why writers are so important to Wattpad. And I think that's clear, but the more interesting thing here is that they're wondering how you incentivize writers to work on the platform. What are the different ways you work with writers to incentivize them to continue working?
Sure. Oh yeah, I love this question. So when Wattpad started really at scale with writers about 10 years ago, posting your first story or your first chapter on Wattpad was, kind of a scary thing to do. But then you get your first comment or your first read, and someone says, "Hey, you're new here. Really like where the story's going. Would love to see more character development on Eve," or something. That engagement is incredibly rewarding and validating and important for a writer to continue to go. That's why we refer to it as social storytelling. You're not just writing on your own, on your computer. You're getting positive reinforcement and validation from people potentially around the world. And for a very long time, that was sufficient in keeping our writing community happy, and we saw a lot of growth and momentum from doing that. But one thing we started noticing was our writers were becoming extremely popular. They were getting picked off by Netflix to go produce The Kissing Booth. They were getting published all around the world by publishers. And so we knew that writers on Wattpad were capable of so much in terms of that whole entertainment vertical I was just referring to. And so how do you get a writer there? You got to help them make money. You have to be able to change their lives. And so we were told by writers all day long, you've changed my life because you've given me this platform, this voice. I found a community. These were all incredible things that we're very proud of and we care a lot about. But we also knew that there were writers who were like, help me change my life by letting me be a full-time writer. And so now we've been able to pay writers through a program called Paid Stories within Wattpad itself, where now a writer can make money through the stories that they've earned. And writers have told us that they've been able to put down payments on houses because of that. And you can imagine when a writer is able to become an executive producer on their movie deal, or the royalties that they make from their book sales. Those are all the ways that we help ensure that a writer is rewarded as a part of their experience on Wattpad, and that they see those opportunities are endless.
Very cool. I've got a question here. So Wattpad's a Canadian company. Clarifies, based in New York, but we have important Canadian roots as well. I'm not sure if you know about that, but Matt Seeler's born and raised in Canada. Anyhow, but they're asking why you chose to stay in Canada. Why is Wattpad Canadian based?
Yeah, Matt and I have opposite trajectories. I'm a New Yorker who ended up in Canada because Canada's #1 export is really nice people, and I met my Canadian husband in the US and he brought me here. And so I have actually a nuanced understanding of why Canada, because I actually experienced most of my tech career in New York and San Francisco. And so coming to Toronto, one of the things I really saw quickly was something I alluded to earlier in the conversation, this truly diverse and inclusive city that is Toronto. And the two founders of the company, Alan and Ivan, were very intentional when they were fundraising in the early stages, and they were asked by VCs to set up shop in the US. And they were like, move your headquarters to the US, it's where you have to be, it's where the market is, all these things. And they were very intentional to say, we're gonna stay in Canada. We're gonna stay in Toronto because the quality of the people here and the diversity that it represents is an important part of how we need to grow our company. And so far that's really proved valuable to us because while we've expanded our Canadian presence by opening up a second headquarters in Halifax. So we're here to stay.
Yeah. And just one last question here, a follow on to that. They're saying, so how did this diverse company culture play into Wattpad's success, do you think?
So I've never thought that I would work for a tech company that I could say was, almost 50% women and female. And so that's an example of maybe allowing me to be my best authentic version of myself, where I truly feel not only included, but valued. And if I play that out at scale, right? If I can be the most authentic version of myself, if other folks can be the best version and authentic version of themselves, regardless of the color of their skin or their gender orientation or anything else, does that mean that they get to do, hopefully, the best work of their lives here? And that is a fundamental premise of understanding why inclusion is so important at Wattpad and how it then allows us to achieve our business goals. And I already talked a lot about how the importance of the lenses that people wear have an impact on the stories that we choose to curate, to promote, to put out. Even the stories that our machines tell us are the highest quality. And so recognizing the diversity that needs to exist in order for those mechanics to be properly accounted for is an important part of how we think about business.
Fantastic. Well, Jenny, thank you very much for joining us today. And for all the viewers, the recording will be available after the event for you to access.
There's a few questions in the chat that I'll be happy to just type in a few responses if it's helpful.
Oh, and here are some more questions. Oh, thank you. These must have slipped past my attention here. So no, let's go into these.
Okay,
So
sure.
yeah, so here from David Gill, can you tell us a little bit about your teams, how they're structured, creative versus data experts? How do you divide that up?
So we are structured as a matrix organization where we have sort of the business objectives on top, and then we have the different functions that help us achieve those business objectives as horizontals, which then create at the nexus of those two intersection point, mostly squads, product teams that help us get work done. That's a truly cross-functional organization: product, engineering, design, marketing, content, etc. If I'm going to think about your question more with the data lens, our machine learning scientists work very closely with our content team, who best represents our creative team. So we don't have people in-house who write stories. We work with our writers. So our content teams, editorial and coaching, work very closely with our writers. So they really understand what our writers need and looking for and what they mean. And they can give understanding to our data teams that they would never otherwise have. As an example, there's very specific terminology that people use when they're referencing types of characters on Wattpad. And so a scientist looking at that might not know what that means, but a deep content expert would. And so they sit very closely together in terms of the expectation is that they work together to evaluate it. And it becomes an iterative process of, training the machine, testing it out, and then validating it. Literally, we have a whole process around how we validate the output that relies on the human aspect of it. And one thing that's probably worth noting is it's not just people that are at Wattpad HQ. Wattpad, I mentioned, is a very community-focused organization. There's 700 people around the world who are our ambassadors, who work very closely with us on things like when we would ask for their help to validate, on helping us understand content or trends that are happening. So hopefully that answers some of the question.
Great. Okay. And we've got another question here from Aaron Bianchi. Does Wattpad have any feedback to writers during the writing process, driven by machine learning and deep learning analytics that you run on the stories after they're deployed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll use Quality Indexer as an example. We actually have a product that we launched almost a year ago called the Story Insights Report. And that is based on one of the outputs of that Story Insights Report, that you run this report on a story for a writer. One of the outputs is a quality score that we've then correlated with writing level, elementary, junior, high school, university. I don't know if we have like postdoc or something on there. And so we actually use this because we know that our writers crave feedback and that they want to invest time in writing as a craft, as a skill. And so here we have this incredible technology that we sit on. Why not allow our writing community to take advantage of it and to help inform? And so you can run this report over and over again. And if you work on your story, we have seen differences in writing score that writers are kind of aiming for in their process. And so there's lots of different ways that we would love to productize this in the future. And right now it's at least started out as a Story Insights report. And so we absolutely use it. Or a simpler format of that is our editorial staff uses it. They'll run a story that they're working with a writer on, and only a select handful of writers get to go through this process, but they'll run it through the process and they'll be able to guide writers based on an understanding of their score, even if they don't end up sharing what that score is. So it's helped our editorial team greatly.
Cool. And then another question here from Aaron. So does Wattpad have any ideas or designs on automating the story creation process? I think it would be cool to build stories completely with a tech stack.
These are super fun areas that like this particular use case is not something that I'm actively exploring, but we actually have a whole part of the organization called Wattpad Labs dedicated to understanding different formats that would be really interesting for the community, and exploring really innovative projects. It would be super cool to build it. But I would say that the emphasis here would be really what tools would be most helpful to help a writer progress in their journey, as opposed to a tech stack that writes the story on your behalf. And so we are invested right now in tools that help writers progress on their journey. Absolutely. It's a very exciting space to be in because you can see the power and impact that has on the writing community.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, that's all we've got question-wise for today. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And
I really appreciate the time everyone took, and onwards and upwards. And thanks so much for your help, Jeff, and for everyone else too.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Jenny. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. I'm going to hit stop broadcast, everyone.
Okay.
Take care.